Hello, all you positive heads out there. It's so good to be back with all you beautiful reflections of the one source consciousness that creates and animates all things. If you're new to this podcast, of course, we're super happy to have you here. And if you've been listening and enjoying for a while, I would be super grateful if you would please take a moment to give us a review on Apple Podcasts. It's one of the best and simplest ways to pay it forward and help others find the show so that they too can tap into the powerful perspectives and positive vibrations we are collectively emanating. The other unique and magical way to share this show is by sending any friends you think would benefit from listening to this podcast our Game with the Universe link at positivehead.com/game. Also listed in the show notes, which will serve them up a quote unquote random episode when they click it. Just instruct them before clicking the link to close their eyes for a moment and sincerely ask the universe to cue up the episode that contains the insight and perspectives that they most need to hear at this point in their life journey, and then click to listen to whatever episode is synchronistically served up to them. I have heard time and time again from people about the incredible results they received playing the game. So just tell your friends magical results are guaranteed or their karma back. All right, all you positive heads. On this week's Soul Share episode, I'm very excited to have Dr. David Hanscom here with me on the show. David is an orthopedic complex spinal deformity surgeon. How's that for a mouthful? And author who, through his own personal ordeal, discovered that chronic pain is curable by systematically using established medical practices in a self-directed manner, with the key being to connect to our own healing capacity. Super excited to dive in. Hello, David. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and I know you do a lot of work with Dr. Bruce Lipton, who is a guest on the show years back, and actually someone I've been wanting to have back on. What a great guy and message and information he's spread out to the world. So, you know, I know this is going to be a good one. And I'd like to start with my cliche opening question. And my cliche opener is this. You're in an elevator. The woman next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You have 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
10 floors. My wife has challenged me to try to do it in one floor. But here's the bottom line. I guess my message would be is about the word anxiety. And if I had one message to the world, the data has shown very, very clearly that anxiety is a physiological state. It's just a name for the word for fight or flight. Avoiding that sensation is a driving force behind all human behavior. It's a survival reaction. And as Bruce Lipton has pointed out very clearly, he's a good friend of mine, that anxiety and anger are automatic, hardwired survival responses that you cannot escape. We have no choice. And right now, it's 1,000,000 times stronger than your conscious brain, 1,000,000 to 1.
Wow.
And so it's not psychological. It's your body's reaction to a threat or stress.
Wow.
So the key issue is we keep treating this psychologically. It's 1,000,000 to 1 ratio. It's a mismatch.
Wow.
So that one message of just getting the message out there, anxiety is a physiological state. It is not a diagnosis. It's a driving force behind life.
Wow.
It's a gift. It's our gift. We would not be alive without anxiety.
Wow. What a profound revelation. And I mean, that's a great, one of the greatest carrots of an elevator answer I've ever gotten. It's like, okay, I got to hear more about this. That's like really, really interesting. And before we dive in, let's, if you would, provide a brief background, whatever feels relevant, how you began on this healing journey and that you're sharing with the world.
Well, it wasn't by choice. I was a complex spine surgeon. I went to one of the top training programs in the world. I came out of my fellowship on fire to do surgery after surgery after surgery, which I did. And looking backwards, most of the surgeries that I did back then, I should not have done. Because we thought back pain was a muscular problem. We were doing what's called a fusion for back pain. Turns out that the success rate for a fusion for back pain is about 20%. And the chance of making it worse is between 40 to 60%.
Wow.
So in around about 8 years into my practice, the data came out that the success rate of a spine fusion for back pain in the state of Washington was 22%. So I thought it was 90%. And so it's a big operation, and people look at it as a definitive cure. And so I just stopped. I didn't know what to do.
Phew.
And my results were a little bit better because I was pretty diligent about rehab, et cetera. But my results weren't that great. It's a big operation, and you're actually damaging the spine with that operation. So
Wow.
you're actually damaging the spine with a success rate of 22%. It's got a significant number of risks to it. They happen every week. And I just stopped. So at this about the same time, I went into this pure abyss of chronic pain, which involves 17 different mental and physical symptoms.
Wow.
I did not know what happened to me. They were all happening at the same time. So some of them were extreme anxiety, depression, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. I had migraine headaches. My ears were ringing. My feet were burning. Skin rashes were popping up over my entire body. My back hurt, neck hurt, stomach issues. So it turns out I had no idea what was going on. It just kept getting worse and worse and worse. Of course, being a surgeon in Seattle, which is a big medical town,
Yeah.
I asked everybody what's going on. I went through all sorts of testing, and I got the usual answer that most people get in chronic pain, that there's nothing wrong with you. So, jumping way ahead to the last 3 years, I started working with Dr. Stephen Porges, who is author of the polyvagal theory. And have you heard of Stephen Porges at all by
No,
chance?
I have not.
Okay, so he's been doing research for 40 years on the autonomic nervous system, which is the part of the brain that's like the central station of relay. And so what happens, it turns out that your body's chemistry, it determines everything. So we call it physiology. So 90%, so people say there's nothing wrong with you. That's not true. Your body's in fight or flight.
Mm.
Every cell in your body is bathed in inflammatory proteins called cytokines. You have adrenaline, cortisol, histamines. All these are firing up your body in a very severe way. So it turns out that the essence of all chronic disease, mental and physical, both, is sustained exposure to fight or flight chemistry. So it's like driving your car down the freeway in second gear. It's going to break down.
Yeah.
And so what's happened is that in medicine, we're treating just symptoms. We're not dealing with the root cause. So I want to jump to what I call the dynamic. So bottom line is, in 2003, by sort of inadvertently, I came out of chronic pain. I started sharing these ideas with my patients in 2006, but I still didn't understand it very well. In 2009, Dr. Howard Schubner gave a talk on mind-body syndrome, and he listed 33 different symptoms of a dysregulated nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
So I still didn't know what was going on with me. So my wife goes up to him and asks, well, I have this friend of mine who has 17 of these different symptoms you just listed on the board.
Half, huh?
And he looks at her and goes, you mean your husband? So all of a sudden, all 20 years of suffering just clicked into space, clicked into gear in just a millisecond. Then 3 years ago, I started working with Dr. Stephen Porges, who talks about the body's autonomic nervous system, which is what regulates your internal organs, blood pressure, pH balance, etc. So it turns out that you can either exist in fight or flight, which you need to survive, or you can exist in safety, which you need to rest and regenerate. So basically what happens is that under stress, any stress, physical or mental stress, so we have a model called dynamic healing, which has evolved over the last 3 years. So it turns out that every living creature has to process their environment or circumstances or stresses. You have to interpret those, your nervous system interprets those as safe or dangerous. Something's too hot or too cold. Is it safe to walk in the street or is it not? So it's always evaluating every second what's safe versus dangerous. So that's what I call the input. Then you have your nervous system itself, which can either be calm or hypervigilant or hyperactive. And the analogy I like to use is that of a tame cat versus a feral cat. So a feral cat's on guard all the time. And we do know when people come from abusive environments that those effects last your entire life, because you've been programmed that things are dangerous, and they were dangerous when you were a kid. And even though they may not be dangerous now, is still perceived as dangerous. Your body doesn't know the difference. So your nervous system can be either calm or excited. And then the bottom line is the output, or the body's physiology or chemical state. We call that the output. So you have your input, the circumstances or stresses. You have the state of your nervous system, calm or hyperactive. Then you have your physiology, or the output, what's called dynamic healing. So when your stresses are perceived as dangerous, or they overwhelm your nervous system's capacity to cope, you go into fight or flight. So if you come from an adverse childhood, it takes less stress to set off this fight or flight.
Yeah.
So going back to the main message I gave originally, the one message I want to give to the world is that there's a term called medically unexplained symptoms. It came about in about 2002 in the family practice literature. And they were saying, well, we know you're suffering, but there's nothing we can do because we don't know what's going on. So it's not true. When your body's in fight or flight, every organ responds in its own manner. That's why there's so many different symptoms. So it's not like there's nothing wrong. Everything's wrong. Every cell in your body is bathed in this stress chemistry.
Right.
So the name that humans have for that reaction is anxiety. So anxiety is a result of stress. It's not the cause. So Steve Porges and I, and a few others of us, are trying to get rid of that word anxiety completely. Just saying activated threat response. That's it. And then your body's designed to take action to solve the threat or avoid it. If you can't do it, you're trapped. So your body kicks in more stress chemistry, and then you become angry. So anxiety and anger are the exact same thing. And the reason why this is so critical, going back to Dr. Lipton's point, is that anxiety and anger are automatic, hardwired survival reactions. They are 1,000,000 times stronger than your conscious brain. They are not subject to rational interventions. So I'm going to ask you a rhetorical question that it's not intended for you to answer, but I just want you to consider this. So you have anxiety and anger that are 1,000,000 times stronger than your conscious brain. You can't control them. They're not subject to rational interventions. How do you lower anxiety?
The $1,000,000 question.
Well, the answer I'm looking for, there's lots of techniques, but the bottom line is you simply lower your stress physiology. That's it. So there's a bunch of ways of doing that, and that's what's called dynamic healing that we can talk about a little bit later. But I just want to really get out there. The problem is your physiological state. That's the issue. So if we keep treating anxiety as a psychological issue, we're going to lose. And then we're trapped. Then people become angry.
Yeah.
The problem is when you become angry, the research also shows that the blood supply goes from your thinking brain down to the lower brain, and you cannot think clearly. You cannot do it.
Yeah.
So anytime you're anxious or frustrated, your brain's actually offline. You're reacting versus reacting. And that's why people can't solve problems, because they're too busy being upset.
Yeah.
And again, it's not psychological. Your brain physically cannot function the way it should when it's relaxed.
Yeah.
So if you're in fight or flight, your body's blood supply is going to go away from the thinking centers, which are optional for survival, and go into the lower part of the brain. And we get into this reptilian reactive mode, and we don't treat each other very well.
Yeah.
So speaking really grandiose here, I think getting this diagnosis of anxiety, I think getting the nature of anxiety correct is actually a human survival issue. Because we're not treating each other very well these days.
Yeah.
We're all reacting.
Right. Wow. That's quite the revelation. And so, if you take someone who is, in fight or flight because of, whatever circumstances in their life, maybe it's, stress at work, or, worried about paying the bills, or, whatever it may be. I mean, how does one break the cycle? Like, what are some of the things that you can do?
So the model is called dynamic healing. And again, you're addressing the way. So remember, the stresses that are the worst stresses are the stresses you can't control.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So people say, well, manage your stresses. Well, most of the time, the stresses that are really taking you out of the game are the ones you can't control.
Right.
So there's ways of addressing. So again, you want to lower your fight or flight physiology from threat to safety. And so there's ways of processing input. There's ways of increasing the resiliency of the nervous system. And then there's ways of directly lowering the physiology. So let's work backwards for a second. Again, it's called dynamic healing. So with the output, you're in a hypermetabolic inflammatory state. And the bottom line is that there's a nerve called the vagus nerve in the body.
Mm-hmm.
The vagus nerve goes to every organ in the body. It's your internal control system. And it's part of the autonomic nervous system. And it's powerfully anti-inflammatory. So there's things you can do to stimulate the anti-inflammatory nature of the vagus nerve. And so humming actually stimulates the 7th cranial nerve, which stimulates the 10th cranial nerve. So the vagus is the 10th cranial nerve, which comes out of the midbrain. So certain sounds of music, there's certain pitches of music that are very calming. You actually can stimulate the vagus nerve directly with electricity through the ear or on the neck.
Wow.
But the main thing is breath work, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, is that when you do breath work, slow breathing, for instance, stimulates the vagus nerve.
Wow.
So, breathing through your nose actually stimulates the release of nitric oxide. And so you can actually, that's anti-inflammatory. So there's ways of directly lowering your inflammatory state. So when you're doing breath work, it's not psychological. You're directly stimulating the vagus nerve, which is by far and away the most powerful anti-inflammatory effect in the body. So that's, again, those are short-term temporary things you can do all day long, by the way, not hard to do.
It's funny. I have to interject. So I woke up this morning, half asleep. This is like going back, an hour and a half, 2 hours ago. And I accidentally knocked something off of a table. It shattered on the floor. I'm still half asleep. Instantly caused anxiety. It was a gift, a brand new gift from my mother,
Right.
and I found myself not even, just not even hearing or talking to you about how to help with the anxiety and stress of it. I was within moments, I was humming and I was deep breathing.
There you go.
So, yeah.
And it helped, right?
And it helped. Yeah. Yep.
Right. So then the second part is, remember, you have the input, the nervous system, and the output. So you can directly lower the output. But with the nervous system, there's things like you can do to increase the resiliency of the nervous system. So exercise actually helps the brain function better. Sleep is probably number one.
Yeah.
In fact, we know that lack of sleep actually causes chronic pain. It's not the other way around. Lack of sleep actually causes chronic pain.
Wow.
And then anti-inflammatory diets are huge. So we now know, I've talked to Dr. Robert Lustig a few times, who wrote the book called Fat Chance and also the book called Metabolical. And sugar is like smoking was in the 60s. It's flat out poisonous.
Yeah.
It's incredibly inflammatory. And then there's a psychologist, I just heard his podcast, where they're actually directly changing mental health diagnosis through highly anti-inflammatory diets.
Wow.
So cutting out sugar, intermittent fasting are both anti-inflammatory. And so again,
suggesting to intermittent fast, right?
Yeah, there's different ways of doing it, and people do different things, but the intermittent fasting isn't to lose weight. It's highly anti-inflammatory because you induce a process called ketosis. Ketones are very anti-inflammatory in the body. So the problem is, I'll just say one thing really quickly before I finish this model here, is that the problem with chronic pain in general is complex. There's multiple parts. There's sleep, there's stress, there's your medications, your exercise or lack thereof. So there's multiple variables that affect that physiological state. So again, the essence of chronic disease, we'll talk about that in a second, is prolonged exposure to fight or flight. And the essence of solving it is going back into safety as much as possible. So it's very dynamic. It occurs every day. So you can do breath work, you can do humming, whatever you want to do. You can actually do diet, exercise, etc. The thing is, it's a multi-pronged approach.
Yeah.
So diet alone is not going to do it. Sleep alone is not going to do it. Or if you don't have those, the other interventions are going to be less effective.
Yeah. Right.
So the key
It's
issue is
the sum is really greater than the equal parts, right?
way greater. But see, chronic pain is complicated. And so in medicine, what we're doing, we're treating symptoms or the output, we're not looking at the root cause of people's stresses versus their coping skills. So we don't talk to our patients anymore. And so we don't know your stresses. We don't know your coping skills. We don't even know who you are hardly because we're
Yeah.
moving so fast.
Yeah.
And that's a lot different than it was 100 years ago. My
Yeah.
father was a physician, small town country doctor, and he knew everybody. So again, what you're doing is giving your body cues of safety versus cues of threat. So if you don't feel safe with your doctor, who are you going
Yeah.
to feel safe with, right?
Right. Right.
So what we're doing, we're treating just the symptoms, but the root cause is your stresses versus your coping skills. And treating just symptoms is like trying to put out an oil well fire with a garden hose. The fuel keeps coming up, coming up. So you have to go after the root, after the root cause, which means we increase your coping skills and we help you process stress differently. So we talked about the output, we talked about the state of the nervous system, and there's one more factor with the state of the nervous system, and that's called ACE scores. Have you heard of ACE scores, adverse childhood experiences?
No, I have not.
So it's in 1998, they published a paper out of Southern California, the Kaiser study, on over 17,000 patients. And this is at a weight loss program. And they found out they could have a lot of people lose a tremendous amount of weight, unbelievable amounts of weight, and over half of them went back to the weight they were beforehand. They're losing 100, 200 pounds, having a new life, and they go back to their old way of life.
Hmm.
So they started asking the question, well, why? So it turns out that the chance of taking their weight, putting the weight back on again, was directly proportional to the amount of childhood trauma they have.
Oh, wow.
And what happens is called ACE scores, average childhood experiences. It's just a 10-point scale of physical, sexual, emotional abuse or neglect, a parent in prison, a parent on drugs, divorce, physical abuse in the house between the spouses, etc. And the incidence of domestic abuse, by the way, in our country is about 30%, which is really high,
Wow.
really high. So you come from a traumatic background. Remember, your brain gets programmed by your entire life. So you're programmed as a child with all this chaos. Instead of being nurtured and feeling safe, life is chaotic. So trauma is a
Right.
big deal because what happens, people say trauma is stored in the body. I disagree. What's
Really?
stored in the, because think about this. Your cells are neutral, they're Switzerland, they're going to react to whatever comes at them. What does get programmed into your body is your filter. How you look at life is how you determine your body's reactions. So if your filter is things are relatively safe and happy, your body is less reactive. If you're that feral cat who had a traumatic childhood,
Right.
more things seem dangerous because when you were a kid, they were dangerous. Plus, you don't know how to self-soothe. You don't know how to be nurtured. So we know out of Northeastern that your consciousness becomes embedded in your brain the same way as a chair or a table. Your concepts become embedded in your brain the same way as a chair or a table. It's your life filter, it's your life lens. That's what gets embedded.
Interesting.
So the good news about this, so your program by this life filter becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. So yes, your reaction to trauma does get stored in your, it gets programmed into your life lens.
So
Doesn't
you're
get
saying
stored.
I'm sorry, just to clarify there. So you're essentially saying the trauma isn't stored, the filter is stored, and
Right.
you're having constant inputs. And if your filter is, let's say, it's more trauma, sensitive, it's more likely to view things through a frightened negative lens, then you're constantly experiencing trauma over and over because of the constant inputs in the poor filter. Is that correct?
Right. Yep. And there's a book out, it's a marketing book that's brilliant called The Catalyst by Jonah Berger. And I did not know this, but the marketing people know this, is that it's a term called reactance. And what happens, he points out in the marketing world, they say that data never changes your mind. So if you have data coming in that agrees with your life outlook, fine, gets reinforced. If you have data coming in that disagrees or contradicts your life outlook, guess what? You toss it aside. In fact, when you toss it aside, it actually reinforces your life outlook even more. So you get a life lens that gets embedded in your brain. You take action on this life lens based on, that's your reality, your concept of life, your construct, your life outlook is your construct, is how you run your life. And so again, the data gets reinforced every day. Whether there's data that reinforces the view or rejects it, it doesn't matter.
Wow. I mean, isn't there? I mean, certainly there's some acceptance to that rule. Where or yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking about this. I mean, there are times where people do shift their perspective ultimately, but you're saying generally speaking.
Well, with this we'll talk about saying with awareness, you can change anything. So that's the beauty of this process, is that you can change anything. So you can actually, once you become aware of the filter, then you can make changes. So instead of your body see, the problem with you say the body source of trauma, it makes it sound like you're permanently damaged. It's not true.
Right.
The problem is when you're angry, frustrated, and reacting, the creativity in your brain is gone because you're in the lower brain, not the upper brain.
Yeah.
So the process, the disease itself, actually blocks the treatment.
Mm-hmm.
So the number one factor that determines whether people heal or not is simply willingness to engage. But we find out when people are angry, you can't talk to them. They're stuck in their viewpoints, they're rigid thinking, and there's nothing you can do. I've tried for years to try to crack that nut, and I've been unsuccessful most of the time. So if you're a person who's willing, just a little bit of curiosity, just willing to suspend disbelief, just to try things, see what's going on, once you get that wedge started, things start to change.
Right.
So what you're doing, though, as Bruce Lipton points out, is that anxiety and anger are automatic. They're hardwired. You can't change them. You might as well be talking to the hard drive of your computer.
You're right.
But what you can do is you can reprogram it.
Mm-hmm.
So you can reprogram with your new lens, new outlook, new views. But it's a tricky thing because you have to be open to actually being reprogrammed. So the key word is awareness, awareness, awareness. You become aware of the program, become aware of your reactions, and then when you start the reprogramming process, it actually changes the structure of your brain.
Yeah.
And you've heard the term neuroplasticity, obviously.
Yep.
What happens, you're actually creating structural changes in your brain. So again, we're on the nervous system part of it. We talked about trauma. So I had a traumatic background. It was one of the factors that put me into severe chronic pain, is that my brain is hyperreactive all the time. In other words, if you're that feral cat, it takes less stress to set you off in fight or flight.
Sure.
So the trauma therapy that works, and there's a growing school of therapists that do that, is just helping people feel safe. So you're training your brain to feel safe, so it stays online, it doesn't go offline. And so what you're doing, you can't rebuild a burned down house with the burned down timbers.
Right.
You need new timbers. So what you're doing with your nervous system with trauma therapy, you're reconstructing it. So again, so people put a lot of credence in trauma therapy as being the ultimate solution. And for some people, it's a necessary critical solution, but again, it's just one part of the puzzle. So you have trauma therapy, then you add on diet, sleep, and exercise. Then it starts to happen. You find ways to calm down your nervous system. That's the output. Then the input's a big deal. So there's the number one thing that human beings have, which we call the curse of consciousness, has been well documented that thoughts or consciousness, negative thoughts, unpleasant thoughts, have the same impact on your nervous system and physiology as a physical threat. So they're processed in similar circuits in the brain. And the major problem that humans have is that we cannot escape our thoughts.
Right.
What's even worse is when we repress our thoughts, it actually causes brain damage. You're actually shrinking the hippocampus of your brain, which is the memory center.
Wow.
So when you express the thoughts or repress them, either way, your body's fired up. You're in fight or flight. We know people in chronic pain actually have shrinkage of their brain. The brain's physically shrinking chronic pain. Fortunately, when you treat chronic pain, they re-expand. The brain's incredibly neuroplastic. It changes by the second. So the problem that I think the essence of all chronic pain is consciousness, because you can't escape it.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens? So you can't escape your thoughts. What do you do? So there's a simple exercise. And again, this has been documented now in over 2,000 papers. started in 1986 with Dr. James Pennebaker. There's a book called Opening Up by Writing It Down by Dr. James Pennebaker. And you can't escape your thoughts, but you can separate from them. Remember, your thoughts become a reality. And what you're doing is you begin to watch your thoughts separate from them. You can't control them. But what the expressive writing does, the thoughts are on the table, you're here, and you've simply separated from it. And you have to instantly tear them up so you can write with freedom, but also not to analyze them. Because when you write, all these issues come up, but they're not issues, they're just thoughts. So that expressive writing is the one absolutely necessary step of the entire healing journey. There's no shortcuts. The top psychologists in the world back in the 90s and now in the 2000s have not found an alternative.
Wow. So you're saying writing down the things that you're concerned and worried about and getting them out on paper creates separation between you and them. So there's really something to this idea of, let's say if you take a ritualistic approach, if you were to write them all down and then go and, do a meditation and maybe burn them or something, there is really something to that process.
Yep. And you can do it different ways. You don't have to do that. I mean, just even 30 seconds, even just 30 seconds a day. So I was in chronic pain for 15 years. I happened to pick up David Byrne's book called Feeling Good. And David said to write. So I go, okay, I started to write. After 15 solid years, within 2 weeks, my pain began to shift.
Wow.
I go, With 6 weeks, my pain and symptoms were about 70% better, but they weren't nearly what I wanted them to be. About 6 months later, due to a bunch of circumstances, I came face to face with my really deep-seated anger, which I didn't know I had. I thought I was fine.
Yeah.
So the reason I became a major complex spine surgeon is I repressed everything. Bring it on. My attitude was bring it on. You cannot give me, stress cannot break me. That was my nickname was the brick, which I thought was a compliment, but not really.
Right. The irony is thick, thick as a brick.
So I was a master at suppressing everything. I suppressed emotions, I suppressed thoughts, whatever it was, I just suppressed. But guess what? My ears were ringing, my feet were burning, skin rashes were popping up. So my body was reacting, but I wasn't feeling anxiety. I didn't connect to the fact I was angry because what I was perfectionistic and self-critical, which actually is the ultimate anger. I should put the label of anger on it. So 6 months after I started expressive writing, I crossed the anger threshold, and I will say at the time very badly. I'm much better at it now. And within 6 weeks, my symptoms all disappeared, every one of them.
Before we continue on with today's episode, I'd like to take a quick moment to tell you about Function Mushroom Elixir. I originally had the founder of Function on episode 1856 to discuss the incredible healing power of mushrooms. Since then, I personally started taking the elixir regularly, and as someone who is not super sensitive to stimulants like caffeine, I was very pleasantly surprised by the boost and legal buzz it provided me. The elixir is designed to not only increase energy, but focus and libido as well, and it accomplishes all this with a mix of ethically sourced, high-quality lion's mane mushrooms, cordyceps mushrooms, ginseng, guarana, ginger, goji berry, rhodiola, holy basil, and lemon. It is also super easy to take in dropper form. So if you're interested in trying out the fantastic Function Fungi Elixir, head over to positivehead.com/shrooms and use code positivehead at checkout for 10% off.
So I want to say one more thing before we go back and unpack what we just talked about, because we just talked about a lot. So what we find out is that the mental pain is a much bigger problem than the physical pain, because you get these thoughts coming in, you can't escape them, you're trapped, your body now is in fight or flight, you feel anxious, and we hate that feeling. So if I give a patient a choice, I can do surgery and get rid of your leg pain, but your anxiety is going to be the same or worse. Everybody wants to get rid of the anxiety, with maybe 1 out of 10 people saying, I want the pain gone. And by the way, getting rid of the pain does not drop down the anxiety. It's a different set of circuits. So so the bottom line is that to lower anxiety, you simply lower fight or flight. And so we're talking about, lower physiology, we're talking about the nervous system. So expressive writing changes input because you've now separated from the thoughts. Mindfulness, I call it active meditation. So what mindfulness does, again, it's not psychological. You're simply shifting your brain, you're shifting sensory input. So instead of your brain being on racing thoughts, etc., you simply switch to feel, touch. So just sit back in your chair and just feel the chair that you're in. That's it. 5 seconds, multiple times a day, just drop it down, drop it down. And so if you're anxious, frustrated, you can do a little breath work, but also just change sensations. So that's abbreviated mindfulness. And of course, more detailed mindfulness courses are also effective. So you're changing the sensory input.
So really what you're saying there is quick way to mix this up and to start down the healing journey is start paying attention to your physical environment in a way that changes. Like, like right now I've got my hand on my desk, it's wood, it's somewhat cold, it's kind of smooth. I'm normally I would have my hand there and I'm not thinking anything of it because I'm lost in my thoughts about my bills or whatever the stress may or may not be. But if I'm focused on my physical environment, then there's no room for that, and I'm instantly creating a gap.
Yep.
Cool.
So we used to do this during surgery. We actually taught mindfulness-based surgery. So anytime we were anxious or frustrated, we just go to light, touch, and feel. So what would happen with repetition over time, in surgery, is anxiety producing, it's stressful. Spine surgery is sort of a big deal.
Sure.
And so you get all these racing thoughts. So as we taught ourselves, actually I had my golf coach actually taught this to us. He's an athletic performance coach. So we actually used him as a surgical performance coach, that as we taught ourselves actually to go to light, touch, and feel. So the performance model was performance equals skill minus interferences. And so what you want is consistency of performance. So we have a certain skill set where the interferences can be anxiety, anger, too complacent, distracted, or rushed. So you're in surgery and you start getting anxious. Of course, your mind starts racing. So you just drop down your shoulders, take one breath, and just go back to light touch on the instruments. So we did that over and over and over again. And what was fascinating over years of doing this, instead of having thousands of racing thoughts during surgery, they disappeared. Honestly, I swear to God, they disappeared.
Yeah.
I was so connected to every move every time. And that's one of the solutions to chronic pain, by the way, is you just connect to what's in front of you, whether it's positive or negative, just connect. Then you've connected your body, you're connected to your body, you're connected to the environment, and you're starting to allow your body to heal. Because remember, all you're trying to do to get your body to heal is allow it to be in safety versus fight or flight.
Yeah.
So your body in safety physiology will heal.
Yeah.
But it also turns out, which I'm just blown away with, and I don't want to go too far off topic here, it turns out that every chronic disease, mental and physical, is an inflammatory metabolic disorder, every one of them.
Yeah.
So it turns out that anxiety, depression, bipolar, OCD, and schizophrenia are all inflammatory disorders.
Wow.
Half your brain's the immune system. And so your whole brain gets inflamed.
Yeah.
So again, I was taken out by severe anxiety, OCD, which is the worst anxiety disorder ever. And I've gone and manifested by multiple really extreme intrusive thoughts. They're gone.
Wow.
I don't even have the normal distracting thoughts that most people have. We joke about monkey mind. Turns out that these obsessive thought patterns, which might be a topic for a future podcast, are by far and away is what's torturing society. It's taken out the teens and people in their 20s. That with these repetitive thought patterns that we can't stop.
Yeah.
I call it phantom brain pain. So it's a little bit of a different topic, but your consciousness is a big problem as far as keeping your body in fight or flight.
Yeah.
So, okay, going back to the dynamic healing model, we have expressive writing, diverts the thoughts. You have mindfulness, change the sensory input. One of the cardinal rules of what we call the dynamic healing model is you can never discuss your pain or medical
Mm,
care
mm,
or complain or give
mm,
advice or be critical.
mm.
So what you're doing, if
Giving
people
it
in
no
chronic,
energy, essentially.
right?
And also, when you say give no complaining or, just like focus, no focus on the problem itself, right? Giving it
Well, I
none of its.
mean, there's the
eh,
problem, but complaining about it doesn't solve it,
Sure. It
right?
only gives it, I mean, where attention goes, energy flows, right?
Yep.
So you're literally feeding the beast.
Yeah. So what happens is that paradoxically, as you complain about things, your physiology is now fired up.
Yep.
You've actually now your blood supply to your brain has shifted to the lower part of the brain, and you've actually lost the creativity you need to solve the problem.
Mm,
So that's one of our, and that's the expressive writing is one necessary starting point. But right behind it is that if you're in my office and say, look, discuss your medical care or your pain at all with anybody, no complaining about anything,
mm,
no giving unasked for advice,
mm-hmm,
no malicious gossip, and no criticism.
mm,
And unfortunately, when you're in chronic pain, you're self-critical, you're frustrated. And if I'm critical of you for some reason, why do I have the right to do that? Number one. Second of all I'm doing is projecting my concept of reality onto you. It has nothing to
right.
do with you. It's all about
Right.
me.
Right. Right.
So that's been a big one, is simply not being negative.
Yeah. It's what's so great about this is like obviously the name of the show is Positive Head, and
Right.
it's like this is something that sometimes people can look at as woo woo sort of like obviously most people that tune into this show are aware of the power of our where attention goes, energy flows, and that sort of thing. But what I love about this, and it's very much like you know Dr. Bruce Lipton's work in biology of belief, and that this truly changes your physiology when you're
Right.
doing this, right?
Well, I met Bruce Lipton about, I don't know, 10 years ago, liked him, read his book, but I didn't really buy it, just wasn't really following it very closely.
Uh huh.
Then there's a paper out of Texas. Dr. Danzer wrote a paper looking at the effects of your social factors on the immune system. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a bunch of things that affected the immune system. But what happens, these social factors directly affect your inflammatory markers. So the four factors that actually lowered inflammatory markers, one was hope and optimism.
Mm.
The second was a positive outlook or positive affect, positive vision, whatever you want to call it. The third one was a sense of control. And we know the antidote to anxiety is control. And so
Mm.
having a sense of control actually gave you the power, which actually lowered inflammatory markers. And the final one was social connection or community. And so those
Interesting.
factors directly lowered inflammatory markers. Then Dr. Cole out of UCLA pointed out that your body will actually develop these destructive white blood cells, actually destroy your own tissue. He calls them warrior monocytes. They're like killer bees compared to bees. And what happens, the two things that cause that, one of them is social isolation is a big one, lack of
Mm.
connection. And then if you live life with hedonic pleasure, just having fun, trying to distract yourself, etc., your inflammatory markers go straight up.
Wow.
If you live your life with a sense of passion and purpose, your inflammatory markers go straight down.
Wow.
Anyway, when I saw this data, and there's all sorts of data like this is not a few things. So um, with Bruce's work, I go, wait a second. So what you said is dead on, more than documented by neuroscience now. And your belief systems completely change your body chemistry. I have thought for a long time that your inability to escape your consciousness is a major factor in causing chronic disease. And here I was, a major spine surgeon. I did not know what anxiety was. I was so good at suppressing anxiety, I didn't even know what it was. I just didn't
Right.
know. But
Right.
remember, my background was an abusive background, childhood. So anxiety was actually all I knew.
Yeah.
It's sort of paradoxical, right?
Yeah.
Then I thought perfectionism was a virtue, and it's deadly. It's the most pernicious form of anger you can imagine because there's no
What is?
endpoint. Self-critical
Oh, right.
perfectionism.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because the genealogy of anger is a circumstance that you blame, then you're a victim, and then you're angry. So
Yeah.
with perfectionism, nothing's ever perfect.
Yeah.
So then you blame yourself for the situation for less than perfect. Then you're a victim of less than perfect, and you're always frustrated. Well, I used that energy to become a major spine surgeon. That same energy that took me up the hill took me right down the other side.
Sure.
So we have tremendous burnout amongst all professions right now. We're fired up. We're using our quote anxiety as a positive, and it's not. You do not need anxiety to be successful.
Mm.
And again, as you calm your brain down, your creativity comes back. Then you become much smarter, much more deliberate in what you're doing. So we're doing it backwards. We're being busy, 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 anxious, frustrated, driven, accomplishments, whatever it is, but you cannot outrace your physiology. Not going to do it. So the other factor, and I'll finish up the input part with one final thing, is forgiveness.
Mm.
Is that 90% of people in chronic pain have not forgiven the person or situation that caused the problem in the first place.
Wow.
So we know what that does to your nervous system. You're fired up, fired up. So when you're trapped by anything, you're angry. And Dr. Sarno is a famous physiatrist who's done a lot of this kind of work, called it rage. So you're trapped by circumstances, poverty, lack of opportunity, bad relationship, finances, pain. You're trapped and your body goes into fight or flight and stays there and you become incredibly angry. Well, the problem is now you're stuck. Your brain's way offline. And so I don't like the word forgiveness anymore. It's too big of a word. So I call it anger processing. So every day we get triggered, we get anxious or frustrated multiple times a day. It's not like you just forgive somebody and that's it. There's trillions of things in your life that are a threat. So what you do, again, it's a very dynamic process. You learn to process, first of all, awareness. Okay, where I'm anxious or frustrated. And then you use whatever tools you want to actually let it go, let it go. And so with all these tools, you become a professional at basically living your life. So you process your stresses more skillfully. So they don't disappear, but they have way less impact on your nervous system than they normally would.
Mm. I love that. A professional at living your life. It's like,
Right.
that's your job, folks.
Yep. Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway,
Yeah.
we covered a lot. It probably covered more than I intended to. So sorry about that.
No, please don't apologize. I think this is all super fascinating. It's dense. Everything you shared is dense with just like super relevant. I mean, there's no one who won't hear this podcast and can relate in some way, shape, or form, because this is something that we're all dealing with in at various scales, right?
Right.
So, obviously, if you're going to play the game of life, it's helpful to understand understand the rules and how things are working under the hood, if you will. So,
Right.
yeah.
So I do want to make one thing. So I did develop a process called the DOC journey, Direct Your O Care Journey.
Mm-hmm.
And you can use all these tools, but you have to put them together in a meaningful way. It's like assembling a big jigsaw puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
So randomly treating this, random treatments actually are counterproductive. It doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to, first of all, understand chronic pain. You have to understand your circumstances. You have to understand the nature of the solutions, why they work. Then it jumps into anxiety, being a physiological state. Then in the middle of it is about awareness, awareness, awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't change what you aren't aware of.
Yeah.
So we're programmed by our entire life up to this very second. Until you become aware of the programming, you're at the mercy of the programming.
Yeah.
So the middle section is about awareness, then anger. Remember, anytime you're anxious or angry, you're in the past, you're not in the present. Because something in the present kicked up something from the past that was dangerous.
Yeah.
So awareness is a huge factor. So then the sixth section is about becoming a professional at living your life.
Mm-hmm.
So the two parts of healing is you, number one, you look at anxiety and anger as a gift.
Mm-hmm.
It's your fired up physiology. It's just a physiological state. You're not going to control it.
Yep.
Because you develop a working relationship with it, very empirically, dispassionate. And then it allows your conscious brain to move into where you want to put it. So that's where the positive outlook comes into place. So as you program your brain to be what you want, that's where the healing occurs. So what you're doing, going back to that original part of a conversation about our life lens. You can now develop whatever life lens that you want.
Mm,
But I have a little saying that to have a good life, you actually have to live a good life.
mm,
So by the way, if you're always complaining,
yeah.
how are you going to develop your good life?
Yeah. Right.
So again, it's such a mismatch of the unconscious versus conscious brain. It takes a sequence to actually break through the process. It starts to expressive writing, not discussing your pain. Then it moves on through that sequence.
Mm. I think of what you're just saying. It's like, how are you going to live a good life if you're always complaining? Like uh, I love the saying, like the Wright brothers, for example. They didn't learn how to fly by contemplating the stain on the ground of things,
Correct.
right?
Right. Right. They just did it. Right.
Yeah. Right.
So, yeah. Anyway, so those are sort of the concepts. I mean, that's why I wrote the book. That's why I put the sequence together because it's complicated, but it's not, I'm sorry, it's complex, but it's not hard.
Right.
So we have hundreds of patients going to pain free. And again, the mental pain is by far and away the biggest part of the problem. People cannot
Sure.
escape their thoughts. And as one of my mentors has pointed out, that our human brain is not really designed to take in this much sensory input every day like we do. We evolved in nature, we evolved in tribes, we're out in the wilderness, and our brains are not equipped to deal with the amount of data we're putting into this. So
Hmm.
just by definition, with the amount of data we're processing, we're in fight or flight a lot of the time.
Yeah. So you have the two books. Which book takes people through this process?
So what I would do is refer you to a web. So Back in Control, a surgeon's roadmap out of chronic pain is the book I wrote in 2016.
Hmm.
And it's my story. It's a great background. People understand the problem. But it was called the DOC Journey, Direct Your Own Care Journey. I have both an app and a course online. Is based more on the neuroscience that we just talked about, the physiology.
Mm,
So
gotcha.
back in 2016, I actually did not know the physiology. Bruce Lipton and I had not really collaborated. I had not met Stephen Porges. And then in the last 3 years, I'm just telling you a fraction of what we're learning. Again,
Hmm.
every chronic disease is a metabolic inflammatory state.
Hmm.
Long COVID, same thing. We wrote 3 papers on long COVID. So it turns out also Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, cardiac disease, peripheral vascular disease, diabetes, hypertension, obesity are all inflammatory disorders. Cancer, inflammatory disorder. So long COVID actually fits in the same category. So again, the reason why I'm so passionate about trying to get this concept of anxiety out of the psychological domain is that it's a driving force behind all dysfunctional human behavior, trying to avoid the sensation, but it's also the driver of all chronic disease, mental and physical. So we can't treat this massive survival reaction psychologically. And
Yeah.
and so as you go through the sequence, people's pain, I mean, I'm one of those examples. I mean, 20 years later, I have no pain. My ears aren't ringing, my feet aren't burning, I don't have skin rashes, my anxiety is minimal. I still get triggered. I use these tools every day. But
Yep.
again, you become a professional at living your life, which means you process stress more quickly
Yep.
and you nurture joy more consistently. You actually change the structure of your brain.
Yeah.
So, so it's called the DOC Journey. It's at the docjourney.com. And I have an app. We also have an online course, both on the same set of sequence.
Hmm.
And the app is based on our workshops. It's a bit more interactive and experiential because people forget that play is a physiological state that is the opposite of chronic pain.
Mm,
So you have dopamine, oxytocin, anti-inflammatory cytokines. And so play is sort of the ultimate state of regeneration. So it's a physiological state. And in medicine, of course, that word forgiveness and play and stuff like that don't come into medical care, but that's the healing journey. That's it.
yeah. Right. Right. Wow, excellent. Yeah, I'll put links to your resource page, which has all the stuff in the show notes, so
Okay.
people can check it out. And I'm curious with the direct your own care kind of course that you have and everything. Is the app sort of a piece that you use along with that, or is it a separate tool?
So I'm sort of learning. It depends which one you. A lot of people don't really relate to apps very well, so they think the computer course is better. I will say the computer course is a little bit more towards anxiety and in depth. The
Okay.
app is quite entertaining and moves
Okay.
through things a little bit more quickly. So one of my suggestions to consider is, go use the app first and get
Mm-hmm.
through it. You'll have lots of nice results from that. Plus, it's very, very entertaining. It's got cup songs and dancing kitties and juggling scarves and all sorts of stuff. And my wife, who's a tap dancer, actually put it together. We actually do these
Oh, cool.
workshops together. Um, and I would not do them at the same time. So the app might be first, and then the course might be second, or reverse the process.
Yeah, if someone's having I'm thinking of someone in my family with that's experiencing like chronic anxiety, where it's like it's scary. Someone like that, you would probably recommend the doc journey because it's so anxiety focused.
hmm Either one works for anxiety. I actually switched well, if you look at the doctrine course, I actually switched the emphasis to the mental pain or the anxiety. That is what's
Yeah,
torturing people right now. And you actually see, as you calm down your nervous system, the anxiety drops and then your physical symptoms disappear.
yeah,
You actually can't solve your physical pain without solving the mental pain, because
yeah,
guess what? They're the same thing.
yeah. Right.
So I have one girl right now who's in her 20s who does have a severe eating disorder, and we're still in progress. I don't want to say too much right now, but I mean, within 6 weeks, she's turned it around. Now
Yeah,
she's got a long ways to go, but she's
yeah.
flipped it around, so she's not in the depths of what I call the abyss. So
Yep, yep.
yeah, once you start the expressive writing, once you start doing the breath work, you're really affecting your body's physiology very quickly. So
Yeah,
this isn't like so it takes repetition that we do in the rest of your life. As you do it over and over and over again, much becomes automatic. So it's not like it's work; it becomes
yeah.
just a way of processing your life. But really, within 4 to 6 weeks, people start to shift pretty darn quickly with the expressive writing and some of the basic tools.
Wow. This of course has been so fascinating. I think having you back on maybe to discuss, go deeper would be helpful for people, and people would appreciate that. So we can talk about doing that as well. As we sort of wind down here, I do always like to switch it up for a moment and just ask if you have any inspired sort of story of, synchronicity, serendipity, positive paranormal story, anything fun up your sleeve to share?
Well, I just tell you how the whole process started as far as this new process of going on to play. Is that, I mean, how do you sort of put this together? So my wife is a professional tap dancer, and we were
Mm-hmm.
asked to do a workshop at the Omega Institute in New York, and I had no idea what was going on. I'm very didactic, more scientific oriented, so I'm going, great. I can now give 1 week's worth of material to these people, and they're going to learn how to come out of chronic pain.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in retrospect, that was a bad idea to think about. People don't want to hear a week worth of lectures. So what happened is that I started talking to my wife. She's a tap dancer. So we split it up into a structured situation with small groups where my wife did things like cup songs and rhythm. My stepdaughter did lots of mindfulness type work. So about a third of it was didactic, about a third of it was just fun,
Mm-hmm.
and about a third of it was in small groups just talking to each other. So a girl by the name of Esty, and she doesn't mind that I use her name, was there at that workshop, and she thought it was a headache workshop. She didn't know much about it, so I think it was called "Rewire Your Brain to Come Out of Pain."
Mm.
So she signed up, and she was 32 years old at the time. She had seen 10 physicians in New York City. She had 6 injections in her neck and kept spiraling down and down and down.
Mm.
So when the workshop started, I looked at her and she looked at me, and I did not know what I was doing, what I was going to do. And so I'm going, oh my goodness, this is going to be sort of an interesting week. So she was angry, frustrated, asked really lots of sharp questions. And when my wife started doing the cup song, people started to laugh. It was just crazy because cups are flying all over the table. None of us know rhythm. She's a tap dancer. And she had to be vulnerable. And we were being vulnerable in a very safe, structured environment. We started to laugh. By the end of the week, her pain was gone,
Wow.
completely gone. And it's now been almost 10 years, and she's married 2 beautiful
Mm-hmm.
kids. She's never turned back. Her pain is still gone.
Wow.
And that started this whole process of realizing that play. I didn't understand it back then. In fact, we actually did not know why people kept getting better during these workshops, because they did. So we now know about the physiology, what you're doing in a safe, structured environment where people can share enjoyable experiences. There's a profound shift in your body's physiology.
Mm.
So a huge, huge set of concepts came into my consciousness based on that series of events.
Wow. Very, very inspiring. Well, this has been amazing. And once again, everyone, we'll put a link to all of the resource page, probably the best thing
Yeah,
to put. Yeah.
right.
So that has, all the different things that we've discussed. And
So,
anything else?
yeah, I gotta say one final thing. This probably should have
Sure.
been at the very, very beginning. So, okay. So you heard about the doc journey, you heard about dynamic healing, you heard about David Hanscom. So there's a real tendency that if you just generate enough belief in the process, that you're
Mm-hmm.
going to heal, right?
Yep.
This is the opposite.
Hold on. So you're talking about like placebo kind of effect sort of thing, or?
Well, placebo is actually a healing factor. Placebo is extremely powerful drug.
Mm-hmm.
That is the drug of choice, by the way.
Yeah.
That's a,
Right.
again, a different time. So,
Right.
but the process is actually engaged in your disbelief.
Mm.
Remember, all you're trying to do is connect to your own healing capacity, which means you have to connect to what is inside you. You've tried everything forever. You're trapped. You're frustrated. Why would you believe this is going to work? And you
Right.
shouldn't. You should not believe that. Just go with what is. So write it down, piece of paper. Just get it out there that this is not going to work, and that's fine. So what
Yeah.
happens as you start to connect with what actually is,
Mm-hmm.
that's when healing starts to occur.
Mm.
So it's not about generating enough belief in David Hanscom or his concepts or the doc journey or whatever it is. Generating enough belief is a conscious means of dealing with these horrendously powerful circuits. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
work.
Mm-hmm.
So the process, paradoxically, it's a very paradoxical process, is actually rooted in disbelief.
Mm.
That's where it starts. That's where it stays. Because that's what's, your brain's designed to look for trouble. Your brain is designed to always doubt everything. It's supposed to.
Yeah.
But what happens when you are anchored in your disbelief, you don't have to fight it, it's just there. Then you can look out and see what's possible. That's when hope comes into gear.
Mm.
So hope is a lot different than positive thinking. Positive vision is a big deal. Hope's a big deal.
Yep.
But it starts with who you are right this second.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't cut corners, right? You gotta
Nope.
start with where you are to get to where you want to go. You can't.
Right.
There's no skipping steps here. So
Nope.
very, very powerful share there. Thank you for that. I do have one final question for you, and it is this: in 60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life according to Dr. David Hanscom?
To connect with the moment you're in and be a source of inspiration and light to people close to you.
Well said. I fully agree. And you have done that here today. I appreciate you so much for taking the time, and we'll talk about maybe bringing you back on here. And yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to share again.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed the conversation.
Yes. And all of you out there for tuning your beautiful brainwaves and incredible hearts into another episode. Until next time, journey well.